Hello, this is Father Mark, and we're doing the Bible in a year, and I'd like to speak a little bit about the book of Proverbs, which we are also hearing and reading. And this is a very ancient part of the Bible from the wisdom books of the Bible, and they say that it's probably written about the time of the kingdom, the kingship. So parts of it are attributed to Solomon, and King David and his son, King Solomon, they lived in the 10th century BC, so 1,000 years before Jesus, just exactly, about 1,000 years. So that's so ancient. And other parts of the book of Proverbs were written by other wise teachers, and they say those sections also are no later than the 7th century, that they're all written. There's no reason to doubt that they're pre-exilic. That means that they were from before the exile, so the time of the kings of Israel. So these are wise sayings, and as you listen to them or read them, and if it kind of feels like that doesn't really hang together, or it doesn't really sort of connect to the next one, or if you feel that way, well, don't worry, because you're right. The Proverbs are very much a collection of these little snippets, little sayings, and they're not always connected to the next one. So don't worry, just let it wash over you as you listen or as you read, and some of the sayings will certainly strike your heart with the beauty and wisdom of these ancient Proverbs. Another thing that's good to remember about the Proverbs, and also even the Psalms and other Jewish poetry or writing, they had a special way of writing back then. They didn't have TV, so they loved to write and to read, and they had certain ways that they would write. And they would, for example, repeat. It's called parallel couplets. They would say something, and then they would say it again in a different way. That's called a synonymous couplet. Two lines that are kind of say the same thing in a different way. Sometimes the second line would be antithetical. That means kind of the opposite, or saying something that looks at it in a different way. Other times, the second line it's called progressive parallelism, that the second line kind of builds or has sort of a synthetic, development of the idea of the first line. Sometimes they're linked together or coupled in a way that they're comparing, like it'll say, this is good, but the other thing is better, right? So better this than that kind of idea. So that can help you to sort of understand why they wrote the Proverbs in that way. Things to look for. You're always going to hear the little phrase, fear of the Lord. That's like a refrain that punctuates the whole book of Proverbs. It's kind of the basis of life for them. That you revere the Lord, you respect God's laws, and you have fear of offending God. And that's because life is you're either going in one direction or the other. You're either following the way of the wisdom and life, or you're following the way of foolishness and death. So that's how life is. You're either tending toward life, or you're, as we would say, kind of in mortal sin, and it's leading toward death. And so that's what you're going to see in the book of Proverbs. Another thing that we see in the book of Proverbs occasionally is wisdom personified as a woman. And it's very interesting that wisdom speaks, and it says she says, and she invites, and she exhorts us. And the Catholic Church has always ascribed that to the Blessed Virgin Mary is kind of prophesied in that sense, that she is Lady Wisdom. She's the seat of wisdom. Jesus Christ is the wisdom, divine wisdom, but Mary is the seat of wisdom. She brings us the wisdom of God also. Another thing that they would do in ancient times is to have an inclusio, or a frame. They would have kind of symmetrical. They would have one thing, and then they would have another important aspect, which is the most important thing. And then after that, they would have something similar to the first thing. And that was called an inclusio. And for example, there's a whole section which is the main section of Solomon's Proverbs, and that is Proverbs chapters 2 to 7. So chapters 2 to 7 are Solomon's main exhortations, King Solomon's Proverbs. Well, right before that and right after that, you've got Lady Wisdom speaking. Very interesting, kind of a little frame to introduce and to conclude that whole section of the Proverbs of King Solomon. In the New Testament, it's very clear that Jesus Christ is the divine wisdom. And St. Paul says that all things were created through him and for him. Colossians chapter 1, 16, and Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. And in the book of Proverbs, it's very interesting that it says that wisdom existed before anything was created. So in other words, it's kind of a hint already in the Old Testament that there was more than one person in the Holy Trinity before creation. So even the Old Testament, the Jewish people have their scriptures, and it's already a hint, because it says in chapter 8 of the book of Proverbs that before the mountains, before the hills, before God established the heavens, it says, I was there. And I was, at the beginning of his work. And very, very lovely. I was rejoicing, and I was beside him like a master workman. I was his delight, rejoicing. Verse 30 there. So we got this idea of what we believe as Catholics. Our creed says that all things were created through him, that by his word, by his wisdom, everything that in creation and nature is beautiful and orderly and lovely and meaningful. And that's because when God the Father created, he created it through his Son, Jesus, who is the wisdom of God. And so that's so wisdom is Christ. And the second person of the Trinity, the Blessed Virgin Mary, of course, is not God, but she is so united to Christ that Jesus and Mary are kind of one mystery. So that's why, in a certain sense, we can also say that the Lady Wisdom, the woman, feminine personification of wisdom in the book of Proverbs, can also refer to the Blessed Virgin Mary, because she and Jesus are tight. She and Jesus are one, and she also guides us.